Welcome to Transformational Blueprints, the podcast that's here to tackle the big question. Why do so many transformation programs fall short, and what can we do about it? I'm Mario Michaels, founder and director of Synaxia Group, and I'm thrilled to have you join me. In this series, we go beyond theory, bringing you first-hand stories and insights from some of the world's top architecture and transformation leaders. It's all about sharing real-world lessons, sparking fresh ideas, and giving back to the architecture community. So whether you're looking to learn, be inspired, or stay ahead of the curve, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive in together. Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking to Jason Baragry about whether you can automate an architect. Jason is Ardoq's Chief Enterprise Architect and has over 30 years of experience working within enterprise architecture. He's got broad experience working with IT and business interfaces and has held roles within applied research, EA consultancy, and as a chief architect. So Jason, welcome to the podcast.
G'day, Mario. Good to be with you here today.
Good. Brilliant. Well, look, firstly, if we could just start with a bit of background about yourself and how you got to where you are now, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, no worries. So I'm part of those enterprise architects that grew up through the technical track.
Okay.
So, but I did have a different starting point. So I started in software architecture research, both at industry-funded university or pure research, and then into industrial research organizations. I ended up working at a very technical company. So I ended up working at Sun Microsystems for many years, which was very great experience.
Yeah.
Working with software middleware, software languages, operating systems, etc. And then moved into consulting, moved into various architecture roles, and ended up as a chief architect at one of the telecoms here in Scandinavia. And then did that for a number of years, and now I've kind of gone back to my starting point. So I guess you could say I'm running an applied research team in an enterprise architecture tool vendor.
Okay. And how big are Ardoq, just for those listeners that don't sort of know them?
Sure. Ardoq's one of the largest EA vendors in the world. So we're up there in the top right-hand corner of the Magic Quadrant. We're 10 years old. I think we're about 250 people. Nice. 300-400 customers that we have now all around the world.
Brilliant. And what's your remit there then as Chief Enterprise Architect?
Sure. So it's a bit different than Chief Enterprise Architect other places because it's mostly about the product. Okay. So my role is as part of product development, we have a team of people who are domain experts in enterprise architecture. Our job is to work with customers, it's to work with analysts, it's to work with partners, sort of consulting companies, system integrators, to always keep up with what's going on in the industry, to find out how people are working, what their major problems are, and then to feed that back into how we develop the product to help that customer base.
Okay, fine, perfect. Well, we generally tend to start with a question from the previous guest. This guest is Nadir Khan, and he's asked, if you had to start a modern architecture practice from scratch, what would be the 3 principles or things that would be non-negotiable to you?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a bit strange because I have a bit of a different chief architect role because I'm in a vendor organization, but part of what we do is actually in my team, we do customer advisory. So it's surprising, or maybe not so surprising, how often we get asked this kind of question. How do we get started as an enterprise architecture practice? What do you think we should focus on? And even at the more extreme end, we've lost our enterprise architecture practice and we want to build it up again, and we don't want to make the same mistakes. So when I think about that, there's a couple of things. One, non-negotiable is you have to have an architecture team that's focused on the business value of what they're doing.
Yep.
And that gets down into who is it that's going to consume what you're doing? Mm-hmm. What is the benefit to them that they can do that? And can you picture what does good look like? Like what will change? What KPIs will change if they're making use of what you're doing? So that's the first one.
Okay.
Getting yourself integrated into the operational processes of the company.
Okay.
So you don't want to end up pushed to the side. You don't want to be a documentation group. You don't want to be you don't want to be the department of no, which I've been in some of those teams before. You want to make sure that you're part of the execution and you're providing things as part of the execution. And then the third one would be, you really want to make sure that you're there, your team is there to help the company to work better and not the other way around. The company is not there to support you doing your job as an enterprise architect. So sometimes I've been involved with architecture teams and you'll hear things like, well, you know, if only the whole company could speak Archimate, then everything we do would make a lot more sense. I think it's just totally the wrong perspective. You just got to be, how does what we do, how can I adapt that to how people talk, how they work, what are the processes they go through so that we adapt into what they do. We are servants, we're enablers for how the company works. I'll chuck in a fourth one just to be difficult. Especially in the last 6-12 months, automate and augment what you're doing. Everything is moving so fast. You don't have time with traditional old-fashioned ways of working. It has to be data-driven. You have to automate as much as you can, data in, data out. And the way AI is moving, you can see definitely in the next 6-12 months, you won't be able to do your job effectively unless you're making use of AI augmentation where it makes sense to do so.
And that's part of the topic of conversation today, isn't it? Before we move on to that, there's a couple of things that you mentioned, which leads us nicely into our next question, which is, what do you think makes a great architect in today's world? And you've mentioned there, you know, being able to translate that real technical or architecture lingo into business and operations lingo absolutely makes sense. Are there any other sort of skills or things that you think make a good architect?
Well, there's the primary one. The primary one is design. So always go back to that old Grady Booch quote that all architecture is design, but not all design is architecture. So if you're going to be an architect, you have to be able to design. You have to be able to design at the business architecture or the application, any of those domains, you have to be able to design. But then you have to be able to communicate that design. So of course, there's all the skills around it. How do you embed? How do you be connected to the organization? How do you make sure the time and the place that you're doing the design makes sense? How are you able to do the right trade-offs with people, and how are you able to sell that? So it's probably one of the biggest learnings I've heard, and I think I heard my CPO mention this when he was talking to a customer recently. He said, I just wish architects were better at marketing themselves. I know all of us in this industry, we tend to be, on average, a bit more introverted, a bit more focused on the content rather than the presentation. And it's unfortunate because that presentation, as much as as hard as it is for me to admit it sometimes, the presentation and the way the presentation's done and the way the architects explain, like sell themselves and what they do as a team has a huge impact on whether they're successful or not.
Not what you say, it's how you say it, right? And I, you know, whenever I sort of help engineers transition into an architect role, you know, often that is, you know, a staff software engineer who's done some design work, low-level design, and wants to step into a solution architect role. I always ask them, you know, how good are you at sales? You know, because I fundamentally believe architecture is a sales job. You know, you're not necessarily you're selling your ideas, you're selling your design, you're selling why you believe this particular technology or process, whatever it may be, is good for the business. And unless you can figure out how to do that, you're just going to be sat there on PowerPoint presentations and drawing boxes and everything that an architect has a bad reputation for, right? So you need to be out there. You need to be liaising with the wider business, as you say. You need to be able to sell your ideas. And some people call it marketing because sales has got a bad connotation to it, I suppose.
You're spot on. I mean, the quality of the content always comes first, but if no one's using it, then it's no good to anyone.
Pointless, absolutely. And equally, you could be the best salesperson in the world with rubbish content, and no one's then all of a sudden your reputation gets tarnished very, very quickly. So from a vendor's perspective, then what do you commonly see architects or architecture teams struggle with when operating at scale?
Oh man, making things too complicated.
Yeah.
So one of the mantras that we end up saying quite often in my team is precision is not the same as usefulness.
Okay.
And we see this constantly, that architects want to create incredibly detailed, incredibly precise, incredibly correct representations of, how does the business work? How does the IT landscape work? How do they fit together? How do we plan things going forward? And that incredibly detailed, incredibly precise as is and to be designs, no one else can understand. It's just too detailed, right? So, but there's other people, especially again when you're working at scale. Just keep it simple. How can you work at that incredibly detailed level of information in your head or in your tool? But what you present to people and the way you sell it is simplified and presented in their context, in their way of thinking, in their language. And when you're working, especially as more and more companies are decentralizing the way they work, decentralizing the way they're doing that business IT investment, then it becomes even harder because not everything's coming through a central point for approval anymore. Not everything, you don't get the checks and balances that you used to have, which is good because things go faster, but it's bad because you have to have a common way of understanding everything across distributed teams. And that's just really hard. So at scale, you've got to keep it simple. You've got to keep the common vision. You've got to have a way of abstracting the detail into something simple enough that everyone can work with.
Yeah, and I suppose doing what you do, you probably see many businesses and many architects with their own approach to things. So how do you form a coherent architectural point of view whilst respecting those differences, whether you're scaling or whether they're not?
Yeah, you can't.
You don't. No.
So you try and, I mean, honestly, people think different. Everyone sees the world through their own eyes. Everyone has their own opinions. Everyone has their own priorities. So it's really about how do you make sure the differences are sort of handleable? How can you how do you identify the risks where these are things that just absolutely have to be understood? So one way of doing that is governance, right? But you can't govern centrally anymore. You can't enforce from a central point anymore because all large companies are becoming more distributed in their ways of working if they're trying to go faster. So what are the things that you try and automate? Again, part of this data-driven automated approach, how can you enforce through automation? How can you do detection as early as possible? So when people go off track early on, that's when you want to try and catch it, because the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets to change. And then you get that trade-off between, well, they've come too far, it's going to be too expensive to start this again. So you have to be able to detect as early as possible and do as many checks as you can as early as possible.
It must be really hard from a vendor going in and providing that advice, whether it's the advisory piece part of the business or the actual implementation, because you're supporting certain architectural principles without becoming overly prescriptive or disruptive to internal governance. So how do you go about doing that?
It is tough. As a tool, we have to adapt into how the ways of working of the organization. We will make strong recommendations. And I guess any time anyone's done a large system implementation, whether it's a tool or it's a Salesforce or it's whatever, you get this choice of should we adapt the company to the tool, or do we adapt the tool to the company? And everyone tries to adapt the tool, and then they eventually go over to adapting the company. Just because it becomes too hard. So finding that balance between how do we make the most of the tool as it is, versus having to do customizations. Because as you start to customize or configure, then the knock-on effects that you don't see yet are much harder to do. So when we work with these companies, we say start small, get success, focus as hard as you can on the first delivery and the value of that first delivery. Almost everyone says, "Oh, okay, what's our IT portfolio and how does it support the business?" That's the first thing we want to figure out. We say, so you don't need to design the world's most complicated meta model for this. Just do what's out of the box. Take a slice through your organization. And instead of trying to do the entire portfolio, do a slice, show the value of that. And the value of that might be, what's the complexity of IT that supports one particular part of the business? And then you might say, okay, I want to understand the cost structure. So again, start with 1 or 2 slices, try and show what is that IT cost, and then maybe you extend that into IT quality. So doing a slice, and the goal of each slice is to show what is the business benefit of what we're doing in architecture. So, you're doing architecture to show IT cost and quality, and then maybe you're extending your architecture activities to say, how do we support the change portfolio? Again, doesn't have to be the entire portfolio, because large companies are just doing so much stuff at the same time. But let's start in an area where we can make transparent the amount of investment, the amount of time that's going into a certain part of the project portfolio. Let's try and show where the impacts are on the IT portfolio. So, because the big problem is always prioritization. How do we know what's happening where and when? When can we do new things? If we make new prioritizations, what are the knock-on effects in terms of the project portfolio? If you can show that for a slice, then you're doing something useful for the people you're enabling, who are the head of the PPM or the head of the investment committee or the COO or CIO. And then you show success and you start to expand out beyond your slice.
It's almost agile architecture, isn't it? It's doing little iterations. When you've done that, you then move on to a different bit, and then before you know it, you've sort of wrapped yourself around the whole portfolio over a longer period of time. But equally, that portfolio changes, and the prioritization of that portfolio changes. So there's no point trying to take it all on it, tackle the mammoth at the same time. So it makes absolute sense.
Yes, especially the original definition of agile. So it's like, what's the simplest thing I can do that shows value? And then what can I learn from that? And then how can I iterate? Not just how can I work for 3 weeks and then how can I work for another 3 weeks? It's like, try something and learn.
And from an architect's perspective, they've got a vendor in. How and what should architects do to engage with vendors to ensure real value is delivered and not just successful deployment or implementation?
That's a good one. Because we've thought long and hard. Ardoq's been around for 10 years. We've made our mistakes as we've gone along, like every company does. So one thing we've learned is how do we get people off on the right foot? And we have customers that are successful, and we have other customers that are not successful. And the ones that are most successful are the ones that we have a really good working relationship with. And we plan how they're going to work in a successful way. So what we absolutely recommend is, when you start with the tools, sit down and we say, okay, what's your IT strategy? What's your business strategy? For those really important things, how is an architecture team going to help? So what are the deliverables that would help your CIO or COO achieve those objectives? What is a KPI you can measure if your architecture team is being successful? And then what are the things you would do in the tool to deliver on those deliverables, which you can measure with the KPIs?
And give us some example of some KPIs, and because this is a bone of contention with every single architect I speak to around, what's the return on investment? Do you see what I mean? So it's really difficult as an architect. You're not a software developer where I built this, that makes this amount of money, or that's created this efficiency or whatever. Architects do the design of that. So, are there any sort of KPIs that you and Ardoq look out for over a period of time? Say, right, this is the value that architecture team's delivered.
Some of them are really simple governance KPIs. So
Yep.
what percentage of our application portfolio is governed? It has ownership.
Hmm.
Owners are responsible for keeping certain information up to date, and that information is up to date, is updated and checked on a
Yep.
regular basis. That can be a really simple governance KPI.
Yep.
And then the next one, if again, it's all driven out of your objectives of either your CIO or your COO predominantly.
Hmm.
And their KPIs could be, I need to understand the cost structure. So do
Yep.
we understand, have we got cost? Do we understand the cost structure of our infrastructure, of our applications? Is it always up to date?
Yep.
So we're not relying on things coming out of general ledger, which were put in there 5 years ago. We're
Yep.
actually doing it in real time. And then quality. Quality is often a very important one. So are we measuring quality? How do we measure quality? Do we, we have, for example, tickets that are happening, a very easy one. What are the tickets that are being registered on IT infrastructure? Are we able to bring those into an architecture tool? And then are we able to measure the business impact of tickets,
Okay.
of technical quality problems? So your KPI then becomes what is the downtime, the business impact downtime? Can we measure the business impact downtime, and is it
Yeah.
trending in the right direction? That's a
Hmm.
KPI you can have.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So you can do a lot of work to do that. And then architects will have a whole range of things they want to work on, but there's dependencies between them. So
Yeah.
everyone wants to get to how do we do strategy to execution? How do we improve our prioritization? How do we improve benefit realization?
Yeah.
Which you can measure with KPIs. You can measure time to market on projects.
Yeah.
You can measure analysis time on new projects as well. You can measure the amount of money being spent on keeping the lights on projects versus functional improvement projects. But in order to do that, you have to have the foundational things in place, like that we do have full control of our application portfolio. We do understand the cost structure. We do understand which teams are working and maintaining which applications or which value streams.
Hmm.
So there's a natural dependency between deliverables that architects make. So even if you have a goal to get up here, you can have a roadmap of putting things
Okay.
together. Yeah.
And I suppose you're changing the thinking of architecture across the whole business then. So how, as a vendor, do you embed that architecture thinking into your vendor roadmaps and offerings to make them more aligned with the enterprise needs?
It's hard. This is a hard one to answer. I
Yeah.
kind of know because when we're a vendor, we have our team, we have product development, but we also have sales and marketing and technical sales and customer
Yeah.
support who aren't necessarily architects. So they
Yeah.
ask questions like that as well because they're
Yeah.
often talking. So they say, how do we present that? And we notice that there's when we're talking with architecture teams, there's sort of three levels
Hmm.
of detail you talk about. So when you go in and speak to an architect to say, well, what do you want to work on? What do you want to achieve? They often talk about architecture use cases.
Yep.
I want to do strategy to execution in my company. I need to keep track of projects and how they're impacting the IT portfolio.
Mhm.
But then they'll go down a level and say, what I'm looking for in an architecture tool is the ability to do these features. I need to be able to create my own definition of a project, and I need to be able to track these attributes, and I want to be able to create these reports and dashboards.
Yep.
So they go down a level, but they also go up a level, which is the level they speak about to their champion. So they're either the CIO, the COO, the business partner, or the
Hmm.
CFO.
Hmm.
Those people don't think in terms of the architecture use cases. They
Yeah.
think in terms of, are we getting to market faster?
Yeah.
Are we operating with acceptable levels of risk? How do I identify the risk areas in my company so I know where to invest in? How
Hmm.
do I figure out the trade-offs between certain investments now versus the future?
Hmm.
So as an architect, you need to be able to jump up and down these levels.
Yeah.
Super technical feature
Yeah.
tool level.
Super
How do I do this technique as an architect, and then how do I match the goals of the people I work for who are thinking in a much different way?
Yeah. Okay. And you've mentioned automation quite a bit recently, and AI. And when we initially spoke, you coined a phrase which I really like. I'd love you to explain it to us. It was AI for EA, not EA for AI. Explain this for us, if you would, please, Jason.
Sure. So, I mean, like everyone else, we've been getting pushed on, hey, what are you doing with AI? So one of the, and we see this change in the market for the last 12 months. Most architects have been focused on EA for AI, which
Yeah.
is our company is starting to use AI. There's lots of projects that are going on. Our CIO and our CISO and our privacy officer are really scared about what's happening because they don't know which data is going where. They don't know, now that we have MCP connections and other types of tool use in AI, we don't know what the integrations are between these AIs and the data sources in our company. We don't know if we're being compliant. All geographies or many countries have their own AI regulations now. So how do we ensure we're being compliant? So how do we build up support in our architecture team to show support for that, to understand how the data flows are going, so we understand the integrations, we understand the risk and compliance aspects. It's very much EA, traditional EA practices for the AI situation. But then the opposite is, how do we use AI to support how EAs work? That's very much the AI for EA perspective. And now that, as I said, in the last 12 months, just triaging, dealing with all these projects, architects were very focused on the first problem, solving the AI problem in my company. And now they've got a bit of breathing room, and we're seeing a lot more discussion going on about how can I use AI to make my job easier as an architect, which is a lot more, it's interesting for me, a lot more interesting for me, of course. And that's when we start getting into, okay, where do you spend your time as an architect? And if you sit down and look at architects and what they do, a lot of it is the design work, of course. And we can see the potential for AI to help support design work, not replace it, but support architects. But a lot of architects spend their time on just, go around the company and find out what the current state of play is, understand the current application portfolio, the business architecture. They spend hours and hours and hours documenting how things are. They spend hours and hours dealing with large architecture teams where you have a huge span of competence. You've got some architects that have got plenty of grey hair and neck beards that have been around for 100 years. And you've got other people that have just joined the profession or just changed over from somewhere else. And you spend time working with them, spend time bringing them up to speed.
Yeah.
And the more distributed you are as a company, you spend more and more time just communicating. So there's plenty of scope for AI to help with that automated discovery work. So automatically update information about what's happening in the company so you don't have to spend the time doing it.
Yeah.
There's scope for AI to help enforce principles and design patterns and reference architectures, so that a lot of the time you do as a senior architect, helping people make use of things at the right time, that part of your job can be more automated so that you spend more time on the critical design challenges and more on the communication with the people. A lot of architects spend their time, God, I don't know how many times I've created the exact same architecture diagram in different ways because you're talking to different parts of the business who have a different perspective and they need a different simplification.
Yeah.
So just the potential for generating personalized views of the architecture with AI is a huge potential area there. We end up with these very complicated meta models in architecture to represent complicated organizations, which no one outside the architecture team understands. So you spend a lot of the time doing translating. What does this mean? AI can be used to do that kind of semantic matching to simplify a very complicated architecture landscape, which has to be complicated to represent the complexities you want to show, but simplifying it for the people who are trying to consume it from their perspective. So as the big picture areas, there's lots of place where AI can help architects.
And you've mentioned a couple there, but are there any specific tasks or workflows in EA, that AI can realistically automate or accelerate here and now, not in 5 years' time?
Sure. We'll start getting into stuff that we're looking at now.
Yeah.
So if I start at the bottom, so part of it is just manipulating data that's in a tool like Ardoq or any of the other architecture tools, right? You spend a lot of time just doing the manual work to keep that data up to date, to bring in data from other sources. So I was talking to a customer just yesterday saying, look, we have lots of solution architects. We got lots of technical people who update Confluence, they update SharePoint, because that's where they do their work. And it's easy for them to do that because it's free form information. They can just quickly whip up a sequence diagram. They can just use a very simple draw.io tool or Lucidchart or something to quickly show a conceptual architecture. And it takes a bit of work to formalize that into a modeling tool. But now we can use retrieval augmented generation techniques to extract information from these, from Confluence and SharePoint. We can extract, oh, look, there's a new project going on. It's going to generate it's going to create a new application, or it's going to make changes to the existing ones. And that can automatically update the repository now. So all that time that's spent just updating information in a repository, a good percentage of that manual work can now be automated. So that's the kind of thing that's happening. Well, right now, we're at a point where it's starting to happen, and that's just at the data layer. Then once you have that, stepping up a level, there's already tools in the marketplace where you can say you can collect a set of reference architectures, especially cloud reference architectures, where there are a lot of Azure and AWS and Google Cloud reference architectures available. You can store those in a repository, and you can just say to AI, look, I want to build this kind of application, has this kind of interface, and needs this kind of persistence, and needs this kind of authentication, and needs integrations out into this payment gateway, it needs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it will ask you a set of questions. It will identify the collection of reference architectures that are relevant and generate a starting solution architecture for you.
Wow.
So these tools already exist in the market. So bringing them in together and making them usable together with other parts of a traditional architecture EA tool is stuff that's happening now.
And then also from a team perspective, senior architects that support large teams, whether that's a chief architect or head of architecture, whatever it may be, how can AI help them lift up junior talent and accelerate their learning?
We talk about this a lot in our team. So we, one of the things we've been arguing about, we argue a lot too. So we have robust discussions about different topics. So we're talking about experience and the role of experience. And we have less senior people in the team and also in other parts of our organization, and they'll do a design. And for them, it looks completely reasonable to solve a problem. And we say, oh, but what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And all those, the ability to come and show, oh yeah, but what about this situation if this happens, or you haven't considered this aspect, and a lot of that just comes from experience. So there's certain principles that you can document and use, which are always applicable. Certain communication patterns, certain integration patterns should always be used in certain situations. That's the kind of thing that we can automate now. Are you using the most applicable patterns? But there are some kind of things which always come back to experience. And that's something that we haven't quite cracked the code on. How do we represent that so that AI can exploit it in its semantic reasoning approach? So basic patterns, basic principles are no problem. But things that come from experience, I think that's a lot of research going into that at the moment.
That's probably more human-led, isn't it? And what's your vision for how AI will evolve in the EA space, and what does the value chain look like as AI becomes more embedded in architecture tooling?
I think the answer to this question changes as if I just look back in the last 6 months, because it's a bit similar to say development. You know, 6 months ago, people were saying, "Oh, it's not really AI is not going to replace senior developers, or it's not going to really impact senior developers. It's all for really junior toy programs." But just in the last 3 weeks with Claude Code and the way we're now seeing more very senior developers completely changing their work patterns to make use of these coding agents to how they work, and the way they work. I'm going to get to answer you to a question in a sec. The way they work is they kind of collaborate as a master apprentice or a senior apprentice type approach, where they can, this is how I want to solve the problem. For each individual task, I want you to go away and do this, this, and this, and then the agents go and do their work, and they come back, and then you're able to interact with the result and say, "Oh, yes, but more in this direction and this direction." And I think that pattern is something that will come to architecture as well. So it's less deterministic in architecture than it is in coding. There's still a lot of creative, non-deterministic work in coding. But I think much of what we do in architecture in terms of, okay, what are the different things I need to consider here? What are the different design alternatives? I want to go and spec out certain designs based on certain patterns in order to make an architecture decision record. These are my alternatives. This is how I evaluated them. This is the weighting I put on the different functional and non-functional requirements in order to choose a path. These are the kind of things that you're able to set up, or will be able to set up, and it will generate alternatives in a different direction. You'll be able to change the weighting on different functional and quality requirements, which will change how things get generated, not just at the solution architecture level, but at the top level. At the enterprise architecture level, you're often trading off between, should we do this properly or should we do it quick and dirty to get to market? And it's 99 times out of 100, it's quick and dirty. But maybe we could make it more data-driven now using AI, so we can maybe bring some of the balance back. So I think that way of interacting with an AI to have sort of an assistant help on lots of the small individual tasks that you as a senior architect can then guide and change and adjust and iterate on over time. I think that's the pattern we'll also see in architecture.
You don't believe AI will augment the work of architecture because it's too sort of context and context heavy, human led?
No, I think it definitely will augment. But this way of doing it is, I can't see it replacing. Not because I think I'm too good at what I do or what architects do, because it's pretty amazing what they're able to do already. But just the amount of context that architects have, context and context bloat and context rot is a real problem in AI solutions. And often, especially when you're an enterprise architect, one of the differences between enterprise and solution is more about the breadth of time in a context and the breadth of portfolio in the context. Solution architects have often narrower problems and narrower time windows, and enterprise, you're looking across the wider portfolio and timescales. So you have a lot more context to work through. So as an architect, you end up augmenting yourself by how can you break that down into smaller pieces that an AI agent can help you with. So definitely augmentation.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to move on to our quickfire questions. So obviously you go into a lot of businesses as a vendor. What advice would you give to a newly appointed chief architect?
Oh, man. So know who you're working for. Which is not for your team. It's find out what's important to those people. And make sure the deliverables that you and your team work on are going to meet the objectives of what those people want, and then have the roadmap for how they build on each other over time.
Okay. Any advice you wish you'd received earlier on in your career?
Something we talked about earlier. So market yourself.
Yeah.
I'm
Get good at
terrible at
sales
it.
and marketing. Yeah.
So definitely do the value, but definitely show the result of what you're doing. Push forward. That's really important for these enablement roles like architecture.
Okay. What do you think CIOs or CTOs actually care about?
Quality, cost,
Mm-hmm.
and how do they support the business objectives of the people that they sit around the table with. So how can they have defensible answers to the questions that they get? So there's never, you can never make everyone happy, but you need to be able to defend the decisions that you have. So making that information available so that they can be part of robust discussions at the investment level.
Okay. And if you were around that table, going for a beer with a CIO or CTO, and you got to ask one question, and that the answer to the question was a truly honest one, no politics, no corporate, whatever, what would that question be?
So I heard, just riffing off the top of my head, so I heard an interesting stat not long ago that the average length of time for a CIO is like 3 or 4 years before they change jobs.
Yeah, that's about right.
So if that's correct, then if they, how much of their decisions actually come down to just being able to look good within that 2 to 3 year time frame before they get out to find a new job, and is it possible to really prioritize beyond that length of time?
Okay, I like that. Well, from an architecture talent perspective, what's the biggest change you expect to see in the market over the next 5 years?
Well, I think we will have augmentation for architectures from AI.
Yep.
And a lot of the skill set's going to change. So it's going to be very much about how do you treat these AIs like a junior assistant so that they can support what you do, which requires you to be able to systematically break down your own thought process in a way that lets smaller tasks be handled by others and you become a coach or a coordinator.
Yeah.
Which changes the work for architects. They need to be able to think more systematically and break down tasks. But it's going to make it harder for junior architects to build up the expertise to get there.
Yeah.
So there's going to be less, people are going to want to save money everywhere using AI, which means less and less chance for junior architects to build up or have less architects doing the kind of mundane work that builds up your experience over time.
Yeah.
So being able to, two things. Think systematically so you can make use of augmentation, but also if you're a chief architect, how can you build up people? You're going to have to be much more focused on building up talent so that they can get past the automated junior architect assistant.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. At the beginning of the episode, we asked you a question from the previous guest. What's your question for the next guest?
I have to find where it is. Hang on, let me. You can chop this out while I go looking for it again. All right. Yeah. So my question for the next guest would be, it's a bit existential. What would be the consequence for the company you work in now if your EA team was removed tomorrow?
Okay, I like that. Love that. Well, sadly, Jason, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for the discussion. It's been a really interesting conversation and great to chat to you in detail around whether or not we can automate the role of an architect. So thanks so much for an excellent podcast episode and giving us your time today.
No worries. Good on you, Mario.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Transformational Blueprints. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found plenty of insights and takeaways to fuel your journey. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could share it, leave a review, or give us a like. It helps us reach more people in the industry who can benefit from these conversations. Don't forget to follow Synaxia Group on LinkedIn to stay updated on new episodes. The links are in the show notes. Join us next time for more tips, strategies, and stories from some of the brightest minds in technology and transformation. Until then, take care and keep transforming.